Well, it's been extremely challenging, and our staff there has really done an incredible job responding to the needs since the beginning of the crisis. We've actually assisted more than 80,000 civilians who've been caught in the violence, primarily helping them with things like food baskets, hygiene kits, and other really basic essential supplies that they just simply don't have access to.
What do you hope to be able to achieve? Now, let's assume the ceasefire holds. Hopefully it goes on. That's the whole aim. What can you do in 72 hours given the level of desperation of those who are there?
Well, certainly 72 hours isn't much, and we've already finished up almost our first day of the ceasefire. But Mercy Corps is really taking this opportunity to prepare in case the ceasefire doesn't hold, so that we can actually be prepared if fighting continues to continue to serve those in need, while at the same time addressing critical needs, whether the ceasefire holds or not. So the key things that we're doing right now is, first of all, we're actually getting out and assessing what's happened. We really haven't had access to so many communities because of the fighting. So we're literally going in some cases door to door to find individuals and families that are stuck in their homes that haven't had any assistance, and we're assisting them with distributions. We're also bringing in critically needed supplies. We've got 10 massive water bladders that are at the border right now and we'll be bringing in tomorrow, along with more hygiene kits, which we can use then to set up mobile water points. About 1.5 million people in Gaza don't have access to drinking water, or their access is extremely limited. So by bringing these in, we'll be able to use those to meet a lot of that need. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're also moving, we've had our things centralized in a large warehouse in Gaza where we've been distributing from. That's been very difficult with the fighting. Now during this ceasefire, we're taking the opportunity to set up sort of warehouses that are closer to the distribution points. So if fighting does resume, we won't have to travel as far in our trucks and our convoys to reach the people in need. We'll be able to go out very quickly and to get those items out there.
Yeah. No, obviously not all of Gaza is in ruins, but by all accounts, large parts of it are. We're talking about a place where the water was bad to begin with. The UN had said that Gaza would be uninhabitable technically by 2020, and now you've got 485,000 people displaced. Where do you begin to house that number of people, as well as water, sewage, electricity and the like?
Hello and a warm welcome to you. Israel has conditionally agreed to extend the 72-hour ceasefire in Gaza. It is already in its second day, the longest lull in fighting since the conflict began 4 weeks ago. More than 1,900 people have died and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Many of them no longer have a home to return to. The United Nations has been sheltering tens of thousands of people in school buildings, but as our Middle East correspondent Orla Guerin reports from Jabalia, some families are facing fresh uncertainty about where they can find refuge. Now, a warning, her report contains images that you may find disturbing.
On the move again, families who fled Israeli shelling now having to leave a UN school where they thought they had found refuge. At Jabalia Elementary Boys' School, they told us UN staff said they were on their own. Today, they announced on the school microphone there will be no services, no food or water, said Abu Yusuf. Those who want to leave can leave. We are not responsible for those who stay. Do any of you have homes left standing to go back to? The answer from all was no. Well, these families say they are in effect being given no choice but to go. They tell us they have been told there's accommodation available in government schools, but they say these schools are close to the Israeli border and to Palestinian training camps. They say it's a frontline area and it's no place for children. UN schools have sheltered almost 300,000 people during this conflict. It's unclear why desperate families at this school were threatened with a withdrawal of help today.
That's not our policy. That's not what will happen. Food for that area simply has not been distributed yet today, but it is on its way. Similarly, I'm checking on water, but also should be delivered today. That's not our policy to do that.
But generations of the Mesla family were terrified of losing the roof over their heads once again. 72 relatives now call this classroom home. They're kicking us out of here, said Zainab. Should we live in the streets? Where should the women and children go? They started packing, hoping to join relatives at another UN school. 2 family members died there in shelling, but they said it was the safest option. Then they got word it was already full. Nearby, we found 5-year-old Mohammed, who was paralysed. His devoted mother, Sarah, was trying to keep the flies off his face. It's all she could do. She told us she's worried he may not survive. Mohammed gets weaker every time he is moved. Orla, Guerin, BBC News, Gaza.
Well, regarding the displaced, yeah, we're talking about nearly 500,000 people that are displaced. And actually, of those 500,000, or of the displaced people, there's about 10,000 homes that have been completely destroyed. These people have nothing to go back to, even if the fighting does stop. And another 35,000 families have had their houses severely damaged, and their houses will need some repair, but they are inhabitable. So certainly, they're in these IDP centers, primarily in schools. And many of them will continue to stay there. Even though there is a ceasefire now, we've seen people going back to their communities to see if their houses are still standing, perhaps to get some things from their house if they can. But we're not seeing people actually trying to leave the shelters permanently. They feel that the security is not adequate now. It's a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis if this ceasefire holds. So you've got people in the shelters, and then you also have thousands and thousands of people that are staying with relatives or in host families that are in the communities, areas where the homes are still standing and that are a bit more secure.
And as I say, things were
but
bad.
then electricity is also, no, and you mentioned the electricity, and I just, say that, in terms of the water and the electricity, they're obviously very linked. The access to water issue is coming about primarily because the electricity is out. Electricity is used to pump the water, and this is affecting everything from the most critical infrastructure. The medical system, the healthcare system is really at verge of collapse without access to adequate electricity or clean water. So these are all things that are just really creating an incredibly dire situation there.
Sewage apparently running in the streets and pouring into the ocean as well on the limited fishing grounds that Palestinians had. Cassandra, thanks. Cassandra Nelson there with Mercy Corps. You've got a big task ahead of you. Thanks for your work.
Well, it's been extremely
Diplomatic efforts to try and find a solution to a more permanent ceasefire are continuing in Cairo, and there have also been efforts elsewhere. In New York, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon addressed the UN's General Assembly at a special meeting about the situation in Gaza. He called for an end to the cycle of violence.
Do we have to continue like this? Build, destroy, and build and destroy. We will build again. But this must be the last time to rebuild. This must stop now. They must go back to negotiating table. We must not repeat this way, periodically. Why both parties are putting all of international community citizens always on ease and concerned, looking at helplessly many people being killed. The United Nations stands ready to make this last time. And we have to do everything possible to help those in need and support the peace process. I count on the engagement of all of you, and I urge the parties to accept their responsibility for peace and for future generations of their people. Thank you very much.
Ban Ki-moon there. Well, let's talk to the BBC's Wira Davis. He joins us from Jerusalem. And Wira, we're getting reports of that 72-hour ceasefire potentially being extended.
Yeah, the BBC has had it confirmed to us here by an Israeli official who must remain unnamed at this stage that the ceasefire has indeed been extended. There's been no word from the Palestinian militant group Hamas yet, but this falls into line with what many people had hoped for and expected. There's not just that international pressure on both sides, of course, to stop the fighting and to resume some sort of normality, but looking at it from here, there's nothing in it for either side. The Israelis have been losing some international credibility over what some people see as a disproportionate response to Hamas rocket fire, and of course nearly 2,000 people have been killed, Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and more than half of those civilians, and more than 400 of those have been children. So both sides have lost in this regard. The Israeli heavy armour now has withdrawn from Gaza. Most of it is still sitting outside Gaza. Israel says it's ready to go back in if the Palestinian militants resume their rocket fire. But the big hope now is that these peace talks that are being brokered in Egypt can achieve something, although it must be stressed there's absolutely no hope that there's going to be a long-term agreement here. But what both sides want are very far apart. The Israelis want to demilitarize Gaza. Of course, Hamas wants the blockade to be lifted, so they're still a long way apart.
And John Kerry earlier still showing support for the Israelis, their right to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think the Israelis had earlier been stung by some American criticism on Sunday after the bombing of civilian areas in the south of Gaza near Rafah. That was heavily criticized by the US State Department, and I think John Kerry was back on message in that BBC interview in which he reiterated Israel's right to defend itself and accused Hamas of fomenting much of the violence.
OK, Wirra Davis, for the time being, with the latest there that ceasefire has been extended for now. Thank you very much. We'll, of course...